are you going back to who you were?
Yes, in a sense. Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that there, within all of us, we have that, that inner child that is innocent, and at one point, we were in that space of possibility. Not everybody remembers it that way, though. A lot of people remember their childhood as suffering, as trauma. And oftentimes, too, the brain only wants to remember the trauma. The ego is saying, you were like this as a child, and then you have moments of feeling these feelings as a teenager, and then as adult, and then all of a sudden, the life is filled with trauma. But we have these we have these glimpses. We have these glimpses of more, of possibility, but they can be fleeting. And so what my method is of leaning in is now as an adult, I can lean in to those glimpses. And the glimpse really is of peace, of happiness, of joy, of presence, beyond actually those fleeting can be fleeting feelings. Is what's underneath is presence.
Can we talk about the moment of you realizing the moment of, I call it the moment of surrender, to the point of you being who you are now? What was that journey in between? Because the reason why I go to that, and I was going to talk about this later, is I've worked with you, I've sat down with you, and I've listened to you. And the words you choose and the way you spoke to me and the thoughtful questions you asked, you have got to have gone through a lot of stuff and a lot of understanding, because the questions you asked were questions I had to really ask myself and go really, really deep. Like, you asked questions that I had to go 2, 3, 4 levels down. And when I got there to answer that question, that answered the other 3 that were on top of that. You were really good at that. And I think you're cutting out after that moment. What's that 2, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year growth period to get to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first step was I was very inspired by a nutritionist that I'd seen on like, it was like an infomercial, or it was a TV show, and the highlight was this nutritionist. And in that moment when I saw that, I'm like, ooh, that's something I think I'd really love to do. And then so I took the steps. I started to explore that, and through changing my diet, through exploring possible ways of healing my physical body, opened me to other possibilities, which then I thought, oh, maybe I'd like to start doing yoga. And how I started doing yoga was by simply living where I live in Kitsilano, which is the yoga mecca of the world besides India.
It's pretty much called Yogalano.
Exactly. And I thought, well, those girls, like, on a very, superficial level, that level that I was on at that point was, well, they look really good. I should do that. And then I started to do that. And then I started to hear some of the teachers talk about the philosophy of yoga and about living in a space of loving kindness and talking about awareness and consciousness and all of these different things, different terms that rang true in my heart, but I never really heard anybody talk about. So it felt familiar, and that was beauty of this practice, which I still continue to practice and share.
You made your way to India too, right?
Yeah, I did 4 journeys to India to study yoga, to practice with some really great teachers, and with some really great students of yoga. And yeah, that was a really expansive experience. Again, something that I never envisioned in my life, but taking, this is like the leaning in is, I leaned into that, what seemed like a call to study nutrition, to heal my body, because the body felt like it was suffering. And then when I leaned in there, I wanted to, make my body look good through some sort of fitness. Yoga came up. Ooh, I want to do yoga. And the mind is saying, oh, you want to do yoga because you want to look like those yogis. But on the deeper level, because that's just one side, that's one story. What I believe, my intuition was, growing stronger, and it was leading me in a way where yoga seemed, like the right path. It felt like the right path. And yes, it led me to India and led me to connecting with some really significant teachers in my life, which, going back to what you were saying about the growth period and how I was able to dive into those questions with you, is because I dove into it for myself. I dove into those questions for myself. I sat with myself in silence for many hours, many hours, many times.
Yeah.
And it, a lot of the time I face challenges, but leaning in then came with a new territory, because I wasn't just leaning into these kind of ideas. Leaning in then meant leaning into that, that presence that's always there within, that is what people would call the present moment, which is the place for me where I want to move from, where I find clarity, and where I can then listen to the calling and lean into other avenues of healing.
You have that moment, and you transition into nutrition and yoga, and now this is your work. We know what your work is. Why did you decide to do this, though?